When most people hear the word addiction, they imagine something obvious. Substances, destruction, rock bottom, a visible collapse. But Jung would say the most dangerous addictions aren't the ones that ruin your life loudly. They are the ones that numb you quietly. The ones you can justify. The ones no one questions. The ones you even rename as self-care, being productive, or just how I am. Quiet addictions are not always chemicals. They are psychological fixes, small rituals your psyche uses to regulate discomfort, especially the discomfort created by the shadow. Because the shadow rarely drags you into chaos in one dramatic moment. It keeps you sedated in subtle ways. It whispers, just take the edge off. And it offers you 1,000 innocent-looking escapes. A scroll, a compliment, a little attention, another plan, another purchase, another lesson, another person to fix, another argument to win, another distraction, so you don't have to feel what's underneath. And what's underneath is usually something your conscious self avoids. Loneliness, grief, shame, fear, or the quiet terror of sitting with yourself in silence. Jung believed the shadow feeds on avoidance, not because it's evil, but because it survives through unconsciousness. If you stay distracted, you stay predictable. If you stay numb, you never integrate what you're avoiding. And the shadow keeps shaping your life from behind the scenes. That's why awakening isn't just becoming more spiritual. It's becoming less sedated. It's the moment your psyche stops needing the same anesthetics. And when that happens, the fixes that once felt necessary start feeling strange, empty, almost irrelevant, as if your system is rejecting something that no longer belongs. That's the warning in this video. When you awaken, you don't merely quit habits. You stop feeding the mechanisms that kept the shadow comfortable. And once those mechanisms weaken, 5 quiet addictions begin to fall away, often without you even noticing. You may have already felt it. Something strange has been happening, quietly, almost invisibly. Things you used to do constantly, you just stopped. Not through discipline, not through willpower, not because you sat down and decided they were bad. You simply lost interest. Or more accurately, you lost the ability. Because when you try to return to the old habit, when you reach for it the way you used to, your entire system reacts like it's touching something that no longer fits. Your mind hesitates. Your body resists. And the strangest part is how natural that resistance feels. Not moral, not judgmental, just true. You might even catch yourself wondering, when did I stop? And you can't answer. There wasn't a clean ending. No dramatic turning point. It simply faded out, like a song you didn't realize had stopped playing until the room went silent. This is where Jung becomes unsettlingly accurate, because he noticed that genuine spiritual awakening doesn't require you to force yourself to change behaviors. In real transformation, behaviors don't disappear because you should outgrow them. They disappear because something inside you has shifted, and the old pattern no longer has access. Not wrong, not sinful, not unhealthy, just incompatible. And if you've been feeling this unconscious quitting, it's not you being inconsistent. It's not you losing motivation. It's not you failing to keep up with your old identity. It's your psyche evolving. And that evolution has a very specific signature. The shadow's favorite coping mechanisms begin to collapse. Not through effort, but through transformation. Now let me show you the Jungian principle behind this, because once you understand it, you'll stop trying to force change and start recognizing when change is already happening. Most people think growth is a moral project. You catch your bad habits, you correct them, You discipline yourself into being better. You stop doing what you shouldn't do, and you start doing what awakened people are supposed to do. But Jung saw something deeper. He observed that when awakening is real, when consciousness genuinely shifts, people don't need to force themselves to change. They don't even experience it as changing. It's more like certain behaviors simply stop working. The old cravings lose their charge. The old impulses feel strangely empty. And what used to feel automatic begins to feel psychologically impossible. Not because someone told you it's unhealthy, because the part of you that needed it is no longer running the system. Jung described this as natural shedding, like a snake outgrowing its skin. The snake doesn't wake up and decide, I should improve myself. The skin doesn't come off through discipline. It falls away because something underneath has grown. And once that growth reaches a certain point, keeping the old layer becomes painful, restrictive, unnatural. That's what happens when the psyche evolves. You don't quit behaviors because you should. You quit them because you can't continue. And if you try to keep them, if you attempt to maintain a pattern your consciousness has outgrown, it doesn't feel like temptation anymore. It feels like internal crisis, a quiet nausea, a tension between who you were and who your psyche is becoming. That's also why Jung could distinguish between spiritual performance and real transformation. Performers force changes in behavior. They wear enlightenment like a costume. But the awakened don't try to become different. They discover the old self no longer has the same access. And now we are going to move through the 5 quiet addictions that fall away when that shift becomes real. Starting with the one almost everyone lives by without realizing it. The first quiet addiction is the one most people confuse with being normal. External validation. Not the obvious kind where you beg for praise. The subtle kind you don't even notice because it's woven into your daily behavior. How you speak, what you share, what you hide, what you hesitate to do unless someone nods first. Before this shift, validation is like oxygen. You don't call it a need. You call it feedback. You call it checking in. You call it making sure I'm not crazy. So you do small things all day long to secure it. You reread a message 3 times before sending it, trying to predict how it will land. You soften your opinion so it won't upset anyone. You post something and casually refresh your phone. Once, twice, 10 times, pretending you're not looking, while your nervous system quietly waits for proof that you still belong. Even in real life, it shows up. You tell a story at dinner and watch faces mid-sentence. Are they bored? Are they impressed? Did I say the wrong thing? You share a goal and immediately scan for reactions. You clean up your personality in front of certain people because you don't want to be too much or not enough. Jung noticed that when awakening is genuine, this addiction doesn't get managed. It dies. Not because you become tough. Not because you repeat affirmations like I don't care what people think. But because the psychological structure that depended on approval starts dissolving. And it shows up in the most ordinary ways. You realize you haven't posted anything in weeks. Not as a detox, not as a decision. You just forgot to perform. You reply slower because you're not chasing a reaction. You stop explaining yourself in long paragraphs. You stop rehearsing conversations in the shower. You stop shaping your choices around how they will look. There's a moment that can feel almost eerie when someone doesn't approve, and you notice nothing collapses inside you. No panic. No urgency to fix their impression. You still care about people. You just don't need them to certify you. That's what Jung meant by the death of the approval-seeking self. You don't become arrogant. You become internally complete. And once that happens, the shadow loses one of its favorite levers, because approval-seeking is a perfect way to keep you controllable. But this is only the first layer. The second quiet addiction is even more surprising, because it looks spiritual, and yet it can keep you asleep. This one shocks people, because it doesn't look like an addiction. It looks like growth. Books, podcasts, workshops, endless videos about awakening, new teachers, new frameworks, new keys to the universe. And if you're honest, it can become a daily reflex, almost automatic. You wake up, make coffee, and before your body is fully awake, you're already feeding your mind something spiritual, so you can feel guided, reassured, elevated, protected from drifting back into old darkness. But Jung noticed something uncomfortable. For many people, spiritual consumption becomes a sophisticated form of avoidance, because it gives you the sensation of progress without requiring direct contact with the shadow. You can learn 10 different philosophies and still avoid the one thing you don't want to feel. You can collect insight the way some people collect vitamins, always adding something, while never sitting long enough to digest what you already took in. It shows up in everyday life in subtle ways. You feel anxious, and instead of staying with the anxiety, you reach for a teaching. You feel lonely, and instead of admitting it, you watch a video about high vibration. You feel uncertain, and instead of tolerating uncertainty, you buy another book that promises clarity. Even silence can start to feel like a threat, so you fill it with voices that sound wise. And again, it's not wrong. It's understandable, but it can still become a fix. A quiet addiction to seeking. Jung observed that when awakening becomes real, this doesn't get reduced through discipline. You don't make a strict rule like, no more spiritual content. You simply lose the hunger. The charge disappears. You click on a video that would have obsessed you 6 months ago, and you feel nothing. Not judgment, not superiority, just completion. Like your system recognizes, I've already lived this. You start driving in silence without needing a teacher in your ear. You wash dishes without needing a lesson. You stop turning every moment into a self-improvement ritual. And something else happens. You become suspicious of constant inspiration. Because you realize inspiration can become another way to stay grounded. Another way to avoid the raw, unedited present. So your psyche begins to choose what's real over what's uplifting. Jung would say, the teachings aren't separate from you anymore. They've been digested. You're no longer trying to become spiritual. You're becoming present. And presence doesn't crave endless input. It doesn't need to be entertained into awakening. The seeking ends, not because you gave up, but because you finally found what you were actually searching for. Now, the third quiet addiction goes deeper, because it changes who you can be around and what kinds of relationships your psyche can no longer fake. The third quiet addiction is one you rarely call an addiction, because it looks like loyalty. It looks like being a good friend, being a good son or daughter, being easy to be around, keeping the peace, showing up, staying connected. But Jung noticed that many relationships aren't maintained by love or resonance. They are maintained by performance, by obligation, by history, by guilt. by a fear of being the villain in someone else's story, by the quiet addiction of needing to be seen as good, reliable, kind, no matter what it costs your inner truth. Before awakening, you can do it without noticing. You answer calls you don't want to answer. You say yes to invitations and spend the whole day with a tight chest, already exhausted. You laugh at jokes that don't feel funny. You nod along to conversations that leave you empty. You keep returning to people who only recognize the old version of you because it feels cruel to let the connection die. It can even show up in small, daily rituals. You see a name pop up on your phone and feel a wave of dread, then force yourself to respond anyway. You rehearse your personality before meeting certain people. You edit your truth in real time. You become a version of yourself that keeps the relationship stable. Jung discovered that awakened consciousness can't maintain this for long. Not won't. Can't. Because the psyche begins to reject falseness the way the body rejects food it can no longer digest. The performance starts feeling physically heavy. The small talk feels like sand in your mouth. The polite version of you feels like a costume you can't breathe in anymore. And then something happens that surprises you. You don't dramatically cut people off. You don't send long messages explaining your boundaries. You simply stop doing the dance. You reply later. Then you don't reply at all. You stop initiating. You decline invitations without a paragraph of justification. And one day you realize weeks have passed and an entire relationship has quietly faded, without a fight. This is what Jung might call organic pruning. It can feel like your life is shrinking, like you're becoming less social. But what's actually happening is more precise. Your psyche is losing the ability to betray itself for connection. And yes, some people will be confused. Some will be offended. Some will accuse you of changing. They are right. You did. Now the fourth quiet addiction is even more intimate, because it isn't about other people. It's about the way you've been relating to yourself, as if you were a project that never ends. The fourth quiet addiction is one of the most socially praised, because it looks like maturity. It looks like responsibility, like evolution, like you doing the work. Therapy, healing, shadow integration, self-help routines, journals full of insights, lists of patterns to fix, rules to follow, goals to hit, new habits to build, old habits to break, always becoming, always optimizing. And for a while, this can genuinely help. But Jung observed that for many people, self-improvement becomes a disguised form of self-rejection, a quiet addiction to treating yourself like a problem. You wake up already scanning for what's wrong. You replay conversations, searching for flaws. You analyze your reactions like evidence in court. You keep a mental checklist. I still need to heal this. I still need to fix that. I still haven't integrated enough. Even on good days, there's a subtle pressure. Don't get comfortable. There's still more work. It shows up in ordinary moments. You can't enjoy a peaceful afternoon without turning it into a performance, a gratitude practice, a meditation streak, a productivity plan. You feel sadness and immediately ask, what wound is this coming from? You feel triggered and instantly think, okay, what does this reveal about my attachment style? As if being human always needs a diagnosis. Jung saw that genuine awakening eventually ends this war. Not because you become perfect, not because you finish healing, but because the belief that you are fundamentally broken begins to dissolve. And when that belief dissolves, the compulsion to constantly fix yourself loses its fuel. You still grow, but growth becomes organic rather than forced. You still change, but change becomes natural rather than manufactured. You still notice patterns, but you don't treat them like enemies. A lot of people recognize the shift in small ways. You stop signing up for every new program. You stop hunting for the next method. You stop making your entire identity about recovery, improvement, and spiritual progress. You can sit with your imperfections without immediately turning them into a project. This is what Jung meant by the acceptance of wholeness. Wholeness doesn't mean no wounds. It means you're no longer at war with what's wounded. And when you stop treating yourself as a problem, the shadow loses one of its most reliable strategies, because nothing keeps you controllable like the belief that you're not enough yet. Now, the fifth quiet addiction is the deepest one, because it isn't about approval, or content, or relationships, or self-help. It's about your relationship with reality itself. What happens when your psyche stops arguing with what is? If you step back, you'll see the pattern. These 5 quiet addictions don't fall away because you became better. They dissolve because the inner structure that needed them is changing. Jung treated that as a signature of real transformation. Each one is a psychological fix. Validation is tell me I'm okay. Spiritual consumption is give me certainty. Obligation relationships are don't let me be rejected. The endless self-improvement project is if I fix myself, I'll be worthy. Resistance to reality is if I fight what is, I won't have to feel it. Different masks. Same function. They keep you sedated from what's underneath. That's why genuine awakening doesn't feel like discipline. It's not you forcing behaviors to stop. It's the need behind them dissolving, so the behaviors collapse on their own. And if that's happening to you, don't panic. Don't force the old skin back on. Just notice what your psyche is no longer willing to feed. Because that refusal is the shadow losing access, and your consciousness becoming the new center. So here's what Jung would want you to understand. These aren't 5 things you should try to quit. If you force yourself to stop seeking validation, you can still be starving for it inside. If you cut off spiritual content like a rule, you might still be chasing certainty in a different costume. If you end relationships through anger, you may still be driven by the same fear of rejection. If you quit self-improvement, you can still secretly believe you're broken. And if you repeat acceptance like a mantra, you might still be resisting reality in your body. That's performance. Real awakening is quieter. It's when the psyche stops cooperating with what no longer fits. The snake doesn't rip its old skin off in a heroic act of willpower. The skin loosens because the new form beneath it has grown. And if you try to keep the old layer, if you try to return to the anesthetics that used to regulate you, your system responds with that strange inner no, not as punishment, as protection. So if you've been noticing these unconscious endings, less hunger for approval, less craving for constant spiritual input, fewer relationships that rely on performance, less obsession with fixing yourself, less inner argument with what is, don't shame yourself. Don't label yourself cold, lazy, or different like it's a problem. You're not losing your life. You're outgrowing it. And yes, some people won't understand the version of you that no longer negotiates your worth. Some will call it distance. Some will call it arrogance. Some will try to lure you back with guilt, drama, or validation. That is the shadow's last trick, offering you the old fix. Don't take it. Let the shedding complete. If this resonated, subscribe to Hidden Mind, because in the next video we'll go deeper into what Jung warned about. What happens when the shadow realizes it can't sedate you anymore, and it tries a new strategy. And before you go, take a breath and ask yourself one honest question. What quiet addiction has your psyche already started to refuse, without you even trying? Write it in the comments, because naming it is the moment you stop feeding it.